Welcome back to Vital Signs. We are going to shift gears and talk about fertility. I have our resident fertility expert in studio today, Jessica Preston with DeNova Fertility. Welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me back, Jen.
So we're going to talk about a topic, and trigger alert. Some people might have a little bit of a triggering because we were going to talk about fertility after miscarriage. So once again, this is not medical advice. Please talk to your practitioners. This is for educational purposes only. So what are some of the things after a miscarriage that we can do to improve our fertility? What does fertility look like after that occurs?
So I think the first thing that we need to do, no matter where we are, conventional medicine, functional medicine, is when we have a miscarriage, it's a surprise, especially a first miscarriage. It's not an expectation, especially if you've already had a baby or even if you haven't. You really expect that everything is going to go well and then things take a turn. So the first thing that I want people to know when it comes to miscarriage is that it is less likely to have a miscarriage than it is to have a healthy baby. Okay? Now, trigger alert is right because the miscarriage rate is about 25%, which means 1 in 4. But this does also mean chemical pregnancies, which are those ones that are just look like late periods unless you're really diligent in getting your pregnancy tests and you're seeing that you were pregnant, and then a few days later you end up bleeding. So, and it also includes ectopic pregnancy. It includes everything in this area that can be a cause of miscarriage as well. So not all ectopics are in miscarriage, but if you miscarry an ectopic, it is in that 25%. So when we are looking at what can we do, the first thing we do is we go in and we talk to our provider and we see what is it that we can do to prevent this. After a first miscarriage, and I know we talk a lot about so many joyful things, and this one is not a joyful topic, and it is a very, very hard space to be in all the way through all of your pregnancies once you've experienced one miscarriage. So when you experience that miscarriage and you go in and say, what can I do? There's a lot of us saying, not much except try again. Now let's talk about that process, because a lot of questions I get in a lot of the groups that I'm in is, when is it okay to try again? So when you've had one, some people will say 3 months, and it's when you've had one, and the other way of looking at it is when you've had one full normal cycle. So you're going to your doctor, you're getting your blood test numbers done. This is in conventional space. And you're watching your blood pregnancy test numbers go down to 0. Once they're down to 0, you get those tested once per week. Once they go down to 0, once you have a full cycle, meaning after it's 0, you have a period. Don't try during that month. After that next period, you can try. On average, when you look at that time, it's about 3 months. Now, a lot of providers say if you've had a chemical pregnancy, you can try right away, and that seems to be the general consensus, is that you could try right away again. Now, when it comes to testing and looking when somebody has had a miscarriage, because the risk of miscarriage is 25%, we are not presuming it is for any other reason except egg and sperm didn't do things quite right. We presume the majority of miscarriages are because of a genetic reason. This does not mean something that is a problem with your own genetics or your partner's genetics. It's simply things didn't go quite right in egg and sperm getting together, and it is a sign that that baby would not have lived outside of the uterus well if it can't live inside of the uterus well. So basically what we do is we wait until that time goes by, and then we can try again.
And so you've answered that, but one of the things that we've talked about in the past is the stress associated with trying and, the fertility journey. And there's a whole other level of emotional component when we've had a miscarriage. I know we've experienced that in my family. There is a mental and emotional strain, and there is a process. It's a grieving process, at least as a female in many experiences. So how do we know, yes, physiologically we can try again, but how do we know we're ready mentally and emotionally to go through that? Because we've already discussed in other segments that you have to have your mind right. You have to be in your best space so that you can actually conceive.
I do. I'm not sure if we can ever say we're ready, but I'm sure we can say we're not. So if you know you're not ready, give yourself some time and a break and try to work on really connecting with yourself. I think what we do in times of miscarriage, it's a loss, and there is so much sadness and grief that a lot of us go internal and start grieving on our own, and we don't rely on community. So it's important to involve our partner. There can be a lot of, you're both grieving. You're both grieving. And so when both members of the partnership are both grieving, everyone can feel like their needs aren't getting met. And it's okay. It's okay that you feel like your needs aren't getting met. Just acknowledge that they aren't. I know Brene Brown says this great thing that she meets with her husband, and she says, you know, am I 100% in? Like, you're both 100%, not 50-50. And if she has a day where she says, I'm only 40%, he's like, I've only got 20, then you know that nobody is 100%. But if I have more reserves on one day and I can say, I am 100%, babe, you're 20%, I've got you today. We need to be very discerning on our own percentage of how much we can be there for our own selves, and therefore for our partner, and have a real communication about that, so you can start having that conversation. Make sure both of you are ready when you are trying. If one of you is not, then you're not ready. Your team's not ready. So you both have to be on that same page.
Same team.
Yeah.
So what about multiple miscarriages?
Yeah.
Because this happens as well for a variety of reasons, but what does that look like for someone who has had multiple miscarriages?
Yeah, so in the conventional medicine space, unless you've had 3 miscarriages in a row, we don't classify you as multiple. There's a classification for that.
Of course there is.
There is, and yes, and then you can qualify for a lot of extensive testing to be done to see why might you be having miscarriages. So there are bleeding clotting disorders, like factor V Leiden. There are some genetic issue. There are a lot of different things that could be the cause of that. We talked before about the semen analysis component, you know, and DNA fragmentation, and that genetic component from the male part. So at 3, you can be there. I'll tell you, when I was in my conventional medicine clinic, I'd run all the labs at 2. I couldn't manage thinking that somebody would have to have a 3rd and go through that process one more time before they would qualify to be able to get this testing done. So it was just heartbreaking. So finding out if there's some underlying issue like that is really important. But let's go back to that stress that you mentioned just a few minutes ago, because stress does play its part when it comes to loss. Now, I'm hesitant when I speak about this because when we feel stress, I don't want us to worry then that our stress is going to cause a loss. And that's not at all what I'm saying. That's not at all what I'm saying. But when we are in that rumination space of worry and concern over it over and over again, we need to find some assistance, even if it's for our own well-being. So finding different ways to be able to work through that stress is really imperative. Now, I really do believe that when it comes to this kind of work, especially with multiple miscarriages, getting some help when it comes to some of the subconscious stuff. Mm-hmm. So this is, I know we've talked about woo-woo, if this is, but there are some really beautiful hypnotherapy methods that can help people understand on a subconscious level. 5% of our thoughts are conscious. The rest are subconscious. So subconscious, we don't know they're there. So when we say, I'm not stressed about that,
probably you are.
Or we actually don't know. I can't tell you either. Outside looking in has a different view for all of us. There's things we know about ourselves, and there are things that other people know about us from the outside looking in. So we can all guess. But when it comes to that, I think that there is some really great work in hypnotherapy, biofeedback, meditation, as we were speaking of. I think that would be a really good place to start.
Well, and let's talk for a second. We only have a little bit more time, but let's talk for a second about fear. Because fear is irrational and it's a human emotion. And once we've had a miscarriage, once we've had multiple miscarriages, fear is a huge part. When you do conceive, there is that overwhelming fear that what is this going to happen again? Is this going to repeat? And so that is also something that we don't talk about in general public, and it's so incredibly important. I want to highlight what you said. You said it's important to have support, the right practitioner, treat yourself, make sure you're in a good space, but it's also very critical to have community at this point in time.
Very much so. And a big piece of community when it comes to once you're pregnant again is going to be in finding that right provider who's going to hold that space for you. When I had people that would miscarry at 6 weeks, I needed to make sure I was holding their hand till 7. Mm-hmm. It's that whatever stage you're, if you were 10 weeks, I need to make sure you're okay till 11. And it goes beyond that, but you get the general idea of that. So it isn't just community when it comes to your partner or your family. It's also the people that are taking care of you, because we are the authorities for you to be able to hold your hand and give you that reassurance in what we're seeing. We know what we can do to try to help you through each of those steps.
Fantastic. So this has been a real hard conversation. I know it's a heavy topic for those of you who may have experienced this. I understand. How can we reach out to you? How can our viewers and listeners reach out to you if they're on this journey and they're experiencing some of this?
Thank you, Jen. We are at denovofertility.com. Feel free to go to our website and sign up for a phone call with one of us. We work a lot with the miscarriage space and people that have had losses later in pregnancy as well. So all of us that you would speak to on the phone have a lot of experience in this space. So please feel free to reach out to us. We're also on our all major social media. We are De Novo Fertility Community on Facebook, and then we are De Novo Fertility also on LinkedIn, but on Instagram and TikTok.
Thank you so much again for your expertise. I appreciate you. And we are going to break, but before we break, remember that it is important that we reach out and that we utilize our community, and we never be afraid to take care of ourselves. Once again, everything on this show is not medical advice. You are to see your own practitioners and providers, and then reach out to Jessica or another expert if you do not have that in your corner. We are going to take a brief break. We'll be back after these messages.